when you walk with open arms towards the sun. You feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you, or anything that you learn from a book or from the news. It's not like that, cause it's a thing. It is something that you do. Do, 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 ba, do. Do, 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 ba, do. Do, 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 ba, do. Dibbo, baby, diddle-o. Welcome to the Bassline. Warner Mendenhall is an experienced attorney who delayed his well-deserved retirement to enter in the fray on behalf of the people when medical tyranny started raining down. He has been involved in a few historic cases in the past few years alone, and we are very honored today to welcome back to the Bassline the Honorable Warner Mendenhall. How are you this morning, Warner? Or I guess afternoon by now.
What an introduction, Jeremiah.
Well, it's my pleasure. I have to say, Warner is a friend of mine at this point. We've met a couple of times in New York, and it's always been a delight to talk with him. I met his lovely wife not too long ago, and he's a great guy, and really enjoyed talking with this gentleman. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation, and I have a bunch of things I would love to discuss, and hopefully we'll get through most of it. I want to make a couple of announcements before we venture into the discussion. We are having another 528 frequency jam session this Sunday in Harlem. The doors are at 3:30 p.m. The venue is called Rock Mill Fitness. That's ROKMIL Fitness. The address is 274 Lenox Avenue. If you take the 2 or the 3 train to 125th Street, you don't even walk down one full block. You walk down basically half a block, and right there, just south of 124th Street, is Rock Mill Fitness. And our instruments will be tuned to the 528 frequency, and we have drummers, we have Mbira, we have special guests, and we'd love to see you there. We've had a really great time, and we need folks to continue to support so we can really make this an ongoing thing and something that we can enjoy for years to come. Also, please, of course, check out my Substack. Please, if you haven't already, like, share, read, like, share my latest article, James Roguski is Right. And in that article, there's a petition, which I'd really like you to sign. repealtheprepact.org is where you go to sign that petition. But also check out my article on my Substack, James Roguski is Right. It's time to repeal the PrEP Act. And go back and check out all my previous articles. That's where I get to fully express myself and cover issues that I think haven't been discussed in general. I leave some of the other topics to experts who are more well-equipped than I am, but then I jump in there and I write articles when I feel like something important has not been mentioned here. So I go ahead and mention it and then flesh out those ideas. And of course, you can go to jeremiahhosea.com, buy the theme song to this show, Love's the Highest Truth, or go to remotelearningchess.com and schedule a chess lesson. Of course, I'm a very experienced chess coach, and I'd love to teach you or your loved one. Package deals available, etc. But all that promo out of the way, we're going to get right into this discussion with Warner Mendenhall, who has been involved, as I mentioned, in some very historic cases over the past few years. He is really the people's attorney. He's one of the leading medical freedom attorneys in the world, I would say. And he was involved a few months ago in a rather heartbreaking case, the case of Grace Schara. Am I pronouncing that name correctly, Warner?
It's actually Grace Schara.
Schara. Okay, thank you. So.
Yeah, but to be honest, I make the mistake sometimes and mispronounce it because it's Schara, and but it is actually Grace Schara.
Okay.
It's the Schara family.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So if you could, if people aren't familiar with that case, could you give us a summary of that legal battle, the Grace Schara case, and what happened, and what does it tell us in terms of how we stand in terms of getting justice for victims of deadly hospital protocols?
Yeah, Grace was a 19-year-old with Down syndrome, and she had tested positive for COVID and had actually gone to an urgent care center, and they recommended, not very strongly, but they recommended, there are some signs here. Why don't you take her to the hospital and just have them observe her overnight? But Scott, her dad, also had the option to take her home. So out of an abundance of caution, he went down and took her to the hospital. And, they brought her in. And even they said, you could go home. You don't have to stay here. And they were also trying initially, right off the bat, to limit the father's presence at the hospital. And he wasn't about to leave his 19-year-old Down syndrome child alone at a hospital, so he stayed with her. But they began some treatments and giving her some drugs without even telling the dad that they were giving him the drugs, one of them being Precedex. Now, Grace had a horrible reaction to Precedex right away. And, some people, it's a very commonly used drug. It may be one of the most commonly used drugs in hospitals, but a small percentage of people do have a reaction to it, and Grace had the reaction. A nurse that first night realized that she was having that reaction and turned it back, turned the titers, the feeding of the Precedex into her system down, and she recovered. The next night, they did not even look at what had happened the night before or what the nurse had done to, basically avoid the problem with Precedex. They turned it back up again. At that point, she goes into a life-threatening situation, and they had to save her and give her drugs like atropine, norepinephrine, to revive her, essentially. Now, meanwhile, the dad doesn't even know she's had the Precedex. The dad doesn't even know, even though he's there, that they're having to revive her because of a Precedex overdose, essentially. And the dad doesn't even know that her condition of being very somnolent, meaning not moving, not active, was basically due to these drug interactions that were happening with his daughter, and nobody informed him. And so in her recovery from that overdose, she stayed in the hospital. They actually turned it off for a few days. But unbelievably, now we're talking about time number 3. On the last day of her life, they cranked that Precedex up again. They gave her lorazepam, and she went into crisis again. The doctor, who was the attending doctor at the time, never even looked back at the past record to see that there's been these problems. Nobody on staff informed Scott Schara that there were problems with his daughter, Grace. And then this doctor, on the last day, instead of reviving her from the overdose, actually hit her with another drug, which we all know of, morphine. And the morphine absolutely set her into a spiral downward and killed her on top of everything else that was going on. It was exactly the worst thing they could have given her. Again, they probably should have hit her with norepinephrine and atropine to revive her because she was in this overdose situation. But they gave her something that actually compounded the problem, and she died very quickly after getting the morphine. So that's sort of that's the broad brush, general description of the medical situation. But the issue at trial was informed consent. They didn't inform the dad about what was happening with the daughter on a day-to-day basis. They didn't inform the dad about the Precedex overdose. They didn't inform the dad about the morphine and all that. And on top of that, that last day when she was given morphine, and this is maybe why they gave her morphine, is they had put a do not resuscitate order on the record, which the doctor claims he had discussed with the dad, but the dad testified that no, nobody told him anything about do not resuscitate. So it just seemed to us to be, just really, really negligent behavior and really, putting a DNR on somebody's record without authority is just really stunning. I'm going to give you one other little fact.
Sure.
When you come into the hospital, this is on day 1 again, when you come into the hospital, you have to sign a paper authorizing them to do the work and all this stuff. And Scott Schara's there with his daughter Grace, and instead of having Scott sign that form because he's competent, she's not. They actually said that the form was approved per verbal consent from Grace. Now, Grace has a mentality of about a 12-year-old, okay? She's not competent to make medical decisions, and yet that's what they put on that initial, authorization of services.
Wow.
So literally from the moment she arrived to the hospital till her death, there was no informed consent for what happened to her.
Absolutely.
All under the auspices of COVID, by the way.
Right. What a tragic situation. And I guess, having reflected on it, I really felt for everyone involved, including you, in terms of putting your heart and soul into that case and having a less than desirable legal outcome. How do you feel now, months later, in the aftermath? I mean, were there any lessons learned?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you could write a book about it, frankly. But I mean, in terms,
first of all,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say this about the trial, and the trial did stream online. I'm sure it's still available in various locations, including chd.tv, which was kind enough to stream the trial to anyone who wanted to watch it. But I think I had some attorneys, both, from my team here and some other people who are friends of mine that we brought in to help out with various aspects of the case. And I just have to say, those attorneys were just superb. We couldn't, I really felt like we gave it our all and put on one of the best trials that I've seen in my life. I thought it was really, really good. And I'm very proud of the work that the attorneys did. I'm very grateful for Scott for giving us the opportunity to have all the resources possible to put this trial on. For one, we did, a couple of weeks before trial, we actually did a mock trial. We actually polled the community to try to get, a sense of what the community was feeling about some of the politics that are going on. And then we had jury consultants and things like that. So we actually had the tools that we rarely are able to access in some cases because they're expensive tools. But Scott really, really went above and beyond and tried to make sure we had everything possible. That being said, one of the problems at trial was, we knew from our polling and we knew from our mock trial that conservative politics was a problem with the jury. And we tried to do a motion in limine because a motion in limine is where you exclude evidence. And we actually wanted to exclude, some of the political stuff that was going on. And the judge overruled that and let it in anyway. Now, somebody's politics has nothing to do with why their daughter died, right? It had nothing to do with why Grace died, so it's not even relevant to the case. But that came in, and I do feel like that had an impact because the Scharas are very religious. Their politics are, they're very conservative politics. They're very mistrusting of the government, and I think rightly so, regardless of the political party in charge. They're skeptics about Republicans and Democrats, and that just was, even though that's an important part of their life, it wasn't part of Grace's life, and it shouldn't have been part of the trial, yet it did. So given that we had all the tools, and given the way the trial went, which I thought it went very well. I mean, all the attorneys, and understand, we had 4 attorneys on our side. We had a very experienced team with over 100 years of litigation in courts between and among them. And that's rare that you have all that, but we knew that these themes were going to impact the case, and unfortunately, I think that they did.
Right.
But so it's really with some mixed emotion about the case. On the one hand, I do think it's one of the best cases I've ever had the opportunity to be a part of, and it's one of the best cases we've put on. On the other hand, there were some flaws in terms of the judge's rulings that I think handicapped us a great deal, and ultimately led to that verdict that actually shocked us. We thought we had gotten beyond some of these hurdles by the end of the 3 weeks of trial, but it did shock us a little bit. All the attorneys thought we had done very well, and we thought we had the jury moving in the right direction. But it turned out not to be true.
Wow. Yeah. Is there any legal recourse now, or is it kind of just a done deal for now?
This case and this situation has been going on now for that family for basically 4 years. From the hospital stay to trying to find an attorney to getting through the discovery to getting through trial, and at the end of this massive effort, I think the family, they wanted to vindicate their daughter with this case, but I think they decided it was time to end it and move on. They had made their point. They had cost Ascension Healthcare essentially millions of dollars in defense. They had exposed the attitudes and behaviors of the hospital for the world to see. It's all recorded. Everybody can see it. They had really drilled down on the failure of Ascension to get informed consent from them. And we thought, of course, the jury should have really picked up on that. And they exposed that this is systemic. It's not just a one-off, that this is a systemic problem in healthcare. And I think that partly came because the experts that they brought in were national experts. They brought in national experts from Johns Hopkins University, a couple of them from there, an ethicist who said, oh, no, everything they did was just fine. That you didn't have to inform the family of the morphine. You didn't have to tell them about the DNR. Or to the extent that you did say something about this, they could have understood that meant DNR. Just very wishy-washy, crappy testimony, a crappy justification for what that hospital did. And I think it's exposed these people who think they're elite and all above us all, how really they are really not treating us in a way that is that we expect from them, and that it's an uncommon disdain for the patient that has infected the healthcare system at this point.
Yeah, I have to say, to follow up on that a little bit, I've been an activist my entire adult life, and one of the main things that would cause me to protest would be any number of war events that were going on over the course of my lifetime. And in that sense, I'm an active anti-war activist, so to speak. And then, of course, because of COVID and all that happened over the past 5 years, I was blessed with the opportunity to host this program, and I chose to make it a medical freedom radio program. And now I'm a medical freedom activist on a daily basis, very committed to this ongoing struggle. And my realization through all of this is that while I was protesting the military-industrial complex, it was the military-medical-industrial complex the whole time. And there's quite a bit of crossover. The same way if someone gets killed on the battlefield, it's called collateral damage. If you get killed because of a hospital protocol, collateral damage.
Well, let's go into that just a little bit. I mean, I think most people, especially your listeners, probably understand that, the COVID itself, the illness, was created in a lab by Ralph Barrick in North Carolina under a, basically Department of Defense authorities. And then it's released, and they work with EcoHealth Alliance and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and they're doing apparently gain-of-function research with this as well over there. It's released, And then this it's essentially a biological attack on the United States. And that may sound extreme, but remember, the response to the biological attack was to create a countermeasure to a biological attack. That's literally what it is. It's a DoD contract as a countermeasure program. And it's actually for military readiness. That's all right in the contract. I mean, we're litigating that with the Brook Jackson case. Yeah. So, we've looked at this deeply. So this entire thing from actually the creation of the virus to the response to its release is entirely under military auspices. This is not a public health crisis.
Right.
And then in the hospitals and with the protocols, the hospitals were relieved from liability to great extent. And I don't want to get into this a whole lot, but if you died from remdesivir, that was considered a countermeasure, and you had no recovery, basically.
Right.
So even the protocols, even the hospital treatment was covered under these countermeasures. Now, there's certain ways you can get around that, which we did in the Grace Schara case, and we did in the Karen Michelonis case, which we're pursuing here in Ohio as well. But, it's very, very few cases have gotten beyond the liability shield that also covers hospitals in this crisis. I mean, think about it. How many lawsuits do you know of about people who've been killed by protocols, and how many went to trial? As far as I know, only one went to trial, and that was the one we did in June.
Right.
But everyone else has had a problem. Everyone else.
Right.
Maybe some have been settled off the books that we don't know about, but I mean, there should have been thousands of medical malpractice lawsuits, and instead there has been one.
Right. So, let's, you mentioned Brook Jackson, who's been a guest on this program, and I had the pleasure of meeting Brook in West Palm Beach, Florida, at the Thrive in 25 event that I was honored to co-host in June. And, the Brook Jackson case, I mean, oh my goodness, another historical case that you were involved in. And I really think that the Brook Jackson case is sort of symbolic of this sort of ignorance that we are mired in. And I don't mean that in an insulting or belittling way, but I mean the public is simply not aware of this historic case and the ramifications of it. And if you don't mind, Warner, I'm just going to give a quick summary for our audience, for people who might not,
sure.
Because it's so important, folks. There's a lot of people who are actually very involved in medical freedom and very dedicated to it, and they're not clear on Brook Jackson versus Pfizer and what was revealed there. And it is just stunningly monumental what happened in this case. And basically, Brook Jackson was an auditor who had over 20 years of experience, who went to various medical trials to basically oversee the process and report back that everything was copacetic. And when she showed up at this particular Pfizer COVID vaccine trial site, there were a number of irregularities that were striking. There were people who had no training whatsoever in a medical capacity, who came from the retail industry and from the restaurant industry, who were suddenly thrown into the position of being medical personnel, being nurses. So that's pretty outrageous right there to start out with. But then you have the top medical supervisor, who was supposed to be on the premises at all times, was never there and was literally in a private practice business on the other side of town. So then this resulted in all sorts of irregularities, as you could imagine. And when Brook turned around to report this, instead of it being investigated, which would have been the proper procedure, and I kind of, pointed out when I interviewed Brook that technically speaking, Brook, I don't really consider her exactly to be a whistleblower, because she was literally doing her job. It's almost like calling a cop a vigilante. They can't be vigilantes. They're in an official capacity. So, the point is that she reported all of this, and she was then fired. Not that her observations were then investigated to say, well, what the heck is going on here? So nope, we have a troublemaker on the ground. Let's get them out of here. And of course, there's not an official record of the. Now, who is she contacting, by the way, Warner? Is that the FDA? Who does she file her complaint to?
Well, a couple of things happened. I mean, she did alert Pfizer.
Okay.
And Pfizer actually stopped enrollment at that center because of her report at one point.
Okay.
But the clinical trial contractor was Ventavia.
Right.
And Ventavia went ahead and continued. I mean, they tried to get that cleaned up and move on. And Brook's frustration with their unprofessionalism led to her calling the FDA. That was actually 5 years ago, like yesterday or today.
Wow.
And she got fired 6 hours later. So we're actually talking on the anniversary of her firing.
Oh, look at that.
As I didn't even think about till just now. I'm looking at the date. I'm like 5 years ago just now. She was in the middle of trying to warn the nation of the clinical trial fraud. And to stop this horrific thing that has now happened to us.
Right.
I do think that her efforts saved millions of people from taking the shot and woke up millions of people. It just she was desperate to get the news out, and then unfortunately the federal government basically gagged her for a year until it came out in the British Medical Journal a year later. That she informed and talked to them, and there was a great reporter who wrote the story for the BMJ, and that started to really come out, and then her case was unsealed shortly after that, and then we joined up to help out around that spring.
Wow. Okay, so as incredible as everything that I just described is in the first place, then it gets really, really crazy when we enter the trial. And you can correct me, of course, if anything I'm saying here is inaccurate, or you can add to anything. But amazingly, if I'm not mistaken, Brook testified to everything that she witnessed, and Pfizer didn't particularly deny any of it. They said in resolution that all of that was stated against them, they said, well, I don't know if they used the word fraud, but they basically said, well, yes, we don't deny anything that's been claimed here. We were simply doing as we were instructed by the Department of Defense. And that seemed to fly. That seemed to be legitimate legal cover. And the judge, was it basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Warner, because this is something that's kind of almost hard for me to understand, did the judge basically give them a free pass on the basis that Brook was not privy to the content of the contract which they had with the federal government?
No. The contract is all in the court. It's all there. It's a DOD contract. Again, not public health, Department of Defense. It's all in the court. We're the only side that has really submitted evidence, and we've submitted all kinds of evidence in that court. But what happened ultimately was the federal government, this is under Biden, and we are seeking a change in position under Trump. But under Biden, the federal government came in and they intervened in the case, and they simply said it is not in the public health interest of the United States for this case to continue. And Pfizer's pointing to that, and they're like, yeah, sure, we did what we were asked to do. We provided a product. We didn't really have to guarantee safety or efficacy under the EUA statute, even though contractually they were supposed to provide something safe and effective. Under the statute, it didn't have to be. And they said, look, we provided what we could as fast as we could, and if it didn't, we had no requirements for efficacy in there. And the federal government, at least under Biden, supported that. And our case got dismissed because the federal government wanted it dismissed. We didn't even really get into, depositions and deep discovery with Pfizer. I'll explain that in a minute. Because of the federal government stance. Now, we would like the Trump administration to change that stance and allow us to proceed to take depositions of Bourla and others involved in this program, and also to get internal documents by Pfizer in terms of their communications within their company. So that's what we'd like the Trump administration to do, is reverse this and actually come in and help us. Trump basically was sold a bill of goods by Pfizer, and frankly, I think the other companies as well, but certainly Pfizer lied in its applications. It did various things to hide data, hide deaths, hide injuries, and more people died in the vaccine arm, and I use that, with air quotes.
Mm-hmm.
More people died in the vaccine arm than in the placebo arm. More people got sick in the vaccine arm than in the placebo arm.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen, obviously, everybody knows it's completely ineffective at this point. People who got the shot got COVID, period. So it didn't work. They lied to get it through, and I think the federal government ought to hold them accountable. I mean, Trump was dealing with a very difficult political situation that year. People were acting like, he wasn't doing anything, he wasn't doing enough, and I think he wanted to show that he was being as responsive as he could. What he didn't realize is he was dealing with people who really have no ethics. And in fact, if you remember, they delayed the trial results actually to play with the election results. They delayed it past when it should have been released. We believe that was specifically to affect that election. So, there's so many layers to this thing. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So where does Brook stand now? Is there a next phase in terms of that situation?
There is. It's at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals right now, and we are actually waiting for an oral argument date, which surprisingly it's been sitting there a long time without an oral argument date. So we don't quite know what's going on in the background on this. It seems a little odd how long it's been delayed. I'm kind of happy for the delay because it gives a chance for Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump to step up and maybe do something different than the Biden administration. So we're waiting for them to do that, change the position of the federal government, because clinical trial fraud cannot be the public health policy of the United States.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, how outrageous. I mean, one of the craziest things I've ever heard. And I think on both sides, it's really important. For one, medical freedom activists should be aware of the case as well as possible. Go back and listen to my interview with Brook Jackson. It's way back when, but the Bassline episode 17. Listen to Brook in her own words about what transpired in the case. But also, for all these little hot shots who are pro-vax people, and they read the New York Times and they watch their favorite news programs or whatever, and they've never heard of Brook Jackson versus Pfizer. So that in and of itself indicates they're not as well informed as they think they are. But I want to bring up another case, number 3, which, if I'm not mistaken, you weren't the lead attorney, but Dr. Kirk Moore gives you credit as part of his sort of legal support team. What are your feelings about that victory?
Well, first of all, I don't want to take any credit away from those attorneys, my goodness, that helped Dr. Moore and got him through this. My goodness. I certainly had talked to Dr. Kirk Moore, and I mean, I hope I had some positive things to say to them, things that were helpful, but I don't want to take any credit at all, and I mean zero. Those attorneys who stood up and fought for Kirk Moore are courageous people. And, and Kirk is absolutely a courageous person for what he did. And I didn't know he was giving me any credit, but I just, I appreciate everyone who stood up, and fought however they fought. I mean, Kirk Moore is like a Schindler's List, type situation where he's helping people avoid the consequences of this horrific and really totalitarian, control of people's bodies, injecting an experimental, untested, unproven, unsafe, and ineffective drug on people. I mean, whatever you can do to avoid that, and Kirk Moore was someone who really understood that this was really wrong, and he tried to help people stay in jobs, be able to feed their families and all that stuff. And not everybody could just stand up and walk away from a job. And Kirk tried to help people get around this horrific environment that was created by the mandates.
Yeah. Dr. Moore is a great guy. He stops in fairly often to talk with us and stop the shots on our nightly Twitter Spaces. He was the guest here on the Bassline episode 101. So that's 10 episodes ago. We're in the middle of episode 111 here. So please go back. You can always listen to the Bassline archive if you have a pen or pencil handy. The Bassline, BASSLINE .podbean.com. So PODBEAN, the Bassline, like the bass line in a song, not the other way of spelling bassline. Thebassline.podbean.com. And there's every episode of the Bassline. Please go back and listen to your favorite episode for a second or third time. Please download the episodes, share the files, forward the links, because we've made history on this program in our own right. That Dr. Kirk Moore appeared on this show after his historic exoneration, or being exonerated by the Attorney General of the United States, and he appeared right here on the Bassline within a matter of days. So download that, share it. It really is history, and I think Dr. Kirk Moore is a hero, and he's a great guy in my experience. Really enjoy talking with him and his perspective. And what's also very impressive and inspiring is he's not just taking his victory and kind of going off into the sunset. He's taking that victory, and he's still out here on the front lines speaking up for the victims and speaking up on behalf of the human race. So, Dr. Kirk Moore, phenomenal individual, and please check out my interview if you happen to have missed that, or even if you heard it, go listen to it again, because it really is incredible. The story and what he did, and the fact of him being exonerated is, it's a real victory that we can all take some joy in when there's so much injustice going on a regular basis. That was one good outcome we can actually be happy about. But one thing I'd love to talk with you about now, Warner, we're in the last 20 minutes of the program here, and I'd like to go sort of more into the bigger picture, and just ask you, from sort of a philosophical point of view, because I don't understand the law, but I'm a philosopher in my own right. I try to understand things. I think about things. I question things, and I'm just somewhat amazed that we're dealing with some of this stuff in 2025 in the United States. I mean, the United States prides itself on being the land of the free, right? We love our freedoms, and I cannot believe that the right to say no has become such an abstract thing. I mean, how is it that we're... Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm just, what? I happen to be rereading a book that I got a while ago called The War Against the Weak. And the book is actually about the eugenist movement in the United States that kind of arose in the late 19th century. And let's remember where we were as a country, because at that point, many states were passing laws to castrate the feeble-minded and the criminal and the retarded and the mentally ill.
Wow.
Okay? So they were approving castration. They were sterilizing men and women who were unfit. They were planning to move us and to breed us, essentially. I know this sounds bizarre, but literally there were elites planning to breed us into a better population. And the America's Breeders Association was part of this. The friggin' Cattle and Livestock Association, which was improving our livestock, thought we should also improve our population. And major foundations like the Carnegie Foundation, major elites were on board with this. Yale, Harvard, Berkeley, University of California system. There were people in those institutions teaching eugenics. And so I just want to point out, we've had some horrific things happen, in our history that are just abusive. And I think Joe Latipo's connection of the mandates with slavery is apropos.
I agree.
we are, I hate to say it, but as a white guy, I don't think I get away with saying that. But Joe Ladapo could say that and tell people that, look, this is needle rape, and you're doing something that you're not consenting to. Then what are you? Are you a slave at that point? Are you a slave to this system?
Right.
Are you a slave to this government? Well, the answer is no. Our country has lots of flaws, going all the way back to the beginning, and allowing slavery to continue.
Yeah.
But my God, the fundamental issues that need to be revived and reinforced in the Constitution are these ideas of individual rights against collective rights. In this country, we have natural law, God-given rights that the founders tried to respect and actually referred to in the Constitution. And then they tried to set limits on the federal government. These aren't, they're saying the federal government cannot do anything to abridge freedom of speech, freedom of religion, things like that. So, those were just specific limits on the federal government. They weren't actually even limits on our right. We have rights that extend beyond that. So, I think that that's the fight that we're in. This whole program was a collectivist program, and it's not treating people as individuals.
Yeah.
Even down to some of the clients we represent that have medical problems, and they tried to get medical exemptions. They said, oh, no, there's only 3 medical exemptions or 4, and they're on the CDC website. Well, that's not true. That's between the patient and the doctor as to whether they should make that decision. I don't even like talking about exemptions anyway because we're already into a framework that I don't agree with.
Right.
But, we did fight for a lot of people's exemptions, religious and medical, to the shot. But I don't think anybody should have been subject to this anyway. And our case against the University of California is about just that. Chris Rake simply said, even though he's very religious, did not want to take an exemption because he said, why should I get an exemption, but an atheist does not?
Right.
That atheist has the same rights as I do as a very religious man.
Yeah.
And those rights are to his own bodily autonomy, privacy, and respect for his individuality. So the University of California case puts that front and center. In fact, we did bring in the Nuremberg Code in that case, which actually the judge dismissed. We have 5 remaining counts in it, but we did take that issue to the California Supreme Court. Unfortunately, they didn't let us continue on the Nuremberg Code issues, but this is front and center for us right now in terms of how we move forward and what kind of nation are we going to have, and can we draw those principles and strengthen those principles that were there at the founding.
Yeah.
And they're even more important now because this was a big empty country in some ways, and people could move and get away from things and not have the government on their backs every day. But as we've become so tightly integrated with computers and communications and things like that, it's even more important now to make sure those individual rights are understood and respected.
I agree.
Because the government and corporations have so much more power to override them.
Yeah.
More than ever before. So that's my spiel.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I just I am stunned, honestly. I'm stunned because it seems to me that the body autonomy position is very solid and very fundamental, and the dominant, what's turning out to be, or what is a matter of fact right now, is the dominant position, which is against bodily autonomy, considering mandates to be legitimate and so on. To me, it doesn't withstand any scrutiny. It seems like their main strategy is to not allow for scrutiny. But if you scrutinize this notion that you're somehow putting a vaccinated person in danger if you're unvaccinated, I mean, how preposterous! How preposterous!
Yeah,
there's many risks that we take in life. You're basically taking a risk when you step out of your front door, right? You could get hit by a car. You could get hit with a stray bullet. You can die in an airplane crash, a train crash. You could get mugged. Any number of things could happen. You could slip on a banana peel. But, how can we explain to people, hey, look, you're going to have to continue with your existence and not be overcome by fear that you're sitting next to a so-called unvaccinated person? You're going to have to
Well,
add
the
that onto
irony
the
of
list
it,
of things that you're taking chances about every day.
The irony of it is, if you believe in vaccines and you're vaccinated, you got nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and then it makes that's the
I
ultimate irony.
I never have understood that position. If you're vaccinated and I'm unvaccinated, what do you care about me? It's me who's taking the risk, not you. The supposed risk, right?
Right.
I don't believe.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
that's the problem. The vaccinated don't believe themselves that the vaccines work.
Apparently, right.
And they have good reason not to believe it because they don't. They just haven't put that together. Their cognitive dissonance hasn't gotten fixed yet.
Right. And then, and we couple that with something that Aaron Siri has said many times, and I think it is so profound, actually, which is just to point out this obvious thing that if your product is safe, why do you need liability protection? That makes zero sense.
Right.
And then to really drive the point home, let's point out the fact that companies and industries whose products are not safe don't get liability protection. Industries like the chainsaw industry. We don't give liability protection to things that are known to be dangerous. They manage whatever liability issues they have to deal with as an industry, and they still have a healthy and profitable business. So why should people who claim their product is safe additionally be granted liability protection? That makes zero sense. And even if you're so-called pro-vaccine, you have to admit that doesn't make sense. But we're these abstract ideas are being upheld as primary, and much more sensible ideas which should be at our foundation have been turned into abstract, right? It's an abstract thing to say that I don't want to take an invasive medical procedure. How could that be in a free country?
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know what we do state by state or as a nation. And I also point out I don't know what was going on legally at that time. I wish I knew more about it, but in 1994, I believe, was when Japan ruled that there would be no medical medical mandates, no medical mandates in Japan. So Japan, and I know there's other nations, but Japan, very powerful economy in terms of, global comparison from country to country. The Japanese economy has been quite a powerful one over the years, and Japanese society is very, very well advanced in terms of technology and otherwise. And they don't have medical mandates, and wow, their society hasn't collapsed. Everyone didn't die of polio somehow. So, you can point to Japan and I'm sure other examples in terms of, no, there's no evidence whatsoever that when you remove medical mandates, all of a sudden there's a health emergency that will result from that. No, it's not actually proven, and it's not actually the case. We have 9 minutes if anyone wants to call in. I'm sorry, I should have announced that a little bit earlier, but if you want to talk to the Honorable Warner Mendenhall, the number. It's 888-874-4888. We'd love to hear from you. We do have a few minutes left. If you could jump on the line and join us. But
I want to make a pitch for the group of attorneys that has
go ahead,
worked
please.
so hard throughout this crisis. freedomcounsel.org is comprised of over 250 attorneys that are working day and night on these issues throughout the United States. And many of the court victories and appellate victories that you read about, those attorneys have contributed to the Freedom Counsel community, both with their pleadings, their arguments, and things like that. Oh, did I lose you?
No. I don't know, Dylan or Kevin. I don't know what happened. We heard a dial tone over here.
A dial tone.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. But sorry, go ahead. Freedom Counsel.
freedomcounsel.org. I mean, it's an effort to just have basically a support group between and among attorneys, but also supporting victims and also working to help out the great doctors in this fight. I mean, many of the freedom counselors are defending doctors' licenses, nursing licenses, and likewise, the doctors and nurses themselves are helping to provide expert document review and expert testimony to the attorneys who were going after some of the medical cases. So, it's just been a very synergistic group among, victims, doctors, and attorneys. It is a place where there's ongoing discussion about how to break through the PrEP Act barriers, to break through the immunity barriers, immunity from the liability barriers and liability shield that the pharmaceutical companies enjoy. So I don't know. I'm just. It started out as a small discussion group, and a handful of us back in 2021, and now it's grown to over 250. So I'm very pleased with the growth of that group. And we've had a couple of conferences, the COVID litigation conference with Steve Kirsch, and then the Freedom Council, two of those actually, and then the Freedom Council conference as well last year. And we'll have another one coming up this year, sometime soon, I hope.
So is that freedomcouncil.org?
Yep, .org.
Okay,
yep.
So everyone keep an eye out for that. Another great resource to be aware of, freedomcouncil.org. And that's, I think, a big part of what we need to do here, and I sort of have been preaching this over the past several weeks on Stop the Shots, is we need to make use of the resources that we have. It's not so much, I don't think, a matter of reinventing the wheel per se. I think we need to support the various elements on the playing field. There's a lot of brilliant folks. There's a lot of good resources available, and we need to do our best to sort of make other people available, or make other people aware, of these available resources, and to to partake in the information ourselves. Not just say, oh, that's a nice thing they're doing over there, but roll up your sleeves and support it.
Yeah, we are trying to empower. Kirk Moore benefited from public involvement in his case, and it drove the political response. And then there's cases like the Deb Conrad case on the vaccine adverse event reporting system, and we've learned through what we know about that case that essentially every hospital in the United States violated the law and failed to report vaccine injuries. And by the way, if you're an injured person and they did not report your injury, we believe that we could get a handful of them per hospital together and file cases similar to the Deb Conrad case against Rochester Regional. So, by the way, if people want to follow Deb Conrad, her site is iamdebconrad.com, and if people want to follow Brook Jackson, she's at iambrookjackson.com. And the pleadings, complaints, and things are put up there so you can read them at your leisure. And we would love support of those people who've been so brave standing up. There's donation buttons on those websites. Please donate and help them out.
Yeah.
But anyway, I greatly appreciate you having me on to talk about all this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you so much for joining us. And by the way, that's Brook without an E. So Brook Jackson, Brook Jackson. And, we are pretty much approaching the end of the program here. And, there's so many more things I'd like to ask you, of course, but we'll have to save it for another time. But I'll say, or ask you, I guess, in closing, Warner, what would you sort of recommend to the so-called ordinary person who's not a doctor, not a lawyer, but just really feels uncomfortable with this lack of body sovereignty that we're dealing with, this sort of, lack of respect for the concept of no and the right to say no? What can ordinary people do? In 2 minutes, if you could, just what would you suggest? How do people sort of get involved with this if they don't have the capacity to launch a legal effort, particularly?
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all the ordinary people who stood up and said they would not comply, and they did say no.
Right.
And you and I have talked about this before, the millions and millions of people who lost jobs over their objection to these mandates. Without what they did, we would not be where we are today. We would be in some other really dystopian world. There was a fork in the road, and it's the millions of people who stood up and just said no and did not comply that got us where we are today. And I'm fortunate enough as an attorney, and along with the other Freedom Council attorneys, we're fortunate to have clients like that, and we've been able to vindicate and recover some of the damages. I know that the vast majority have gotten nothing for the fight that they win in. It's just pure sacrifice. And, that willingness to sacrifice, that faith in family, that faith in God, that faith in our nation is really shining through. And I think we just need to continue to watch out and for things that are coming down the road and make sure that if something is happening that you have a question about, learn about it and decide whether you're going to comply or not, and understand that what your rights are and your rights to not comply, your rights to just say no. And this is coming in many areas of our lives too. I'm very concerned about the issue of digital money and digital control.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to start not complying with that, I think, next. And that may be very hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a control grid where they want to be able to turn off your energy use, turn off your travel rights, turn off your money. And I don't want money that they can turn off. So we need to make sure that we maintain money that cannot be controlled digitally and centrally.
Yeah, spend cash where you
voting
can.
Rights. Voting right now, I'm very concerned always about electronic voting. Let's have an effort to get back to hand-counted, in-person, paper ballot ballots. We got to get back to paper ballots that are hand-counted right in front of us so we can all observe it. So, at the state legislatures, we need to make sure that our patients are protected in the hospitals and have a right to have family members there watching what's happening, and that they be informed what drugs they're giving. Going back to the Schara case. You can't, for a father to have sat there and not know that his daughter was in a drug-induced overdose 3 times is just sick. And we need to make sure the state legislatures are aware of that. So all of that needs to happen. And, we're doing everything we can to let people know what the issues are through Freedom Council and other mechanisms. We do have an interview show that's co-sponsored with BrokenTruth.tv. I don't know if you've seen BrokenTruth.tv.
Yeah.
But we've got some good interviews there. So if you want to follow along with what we're doing, a lot of stuff will be popping up there as well. So thank you. I know we've chewed up your time here.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, we do have to run. I got just got the red flag, but thank you so much, Warner. Keep up the great work. Really, really proud of all the tremendous effort you've put forth, and look forward to talking to you soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Come through on Sunday if you're in or around New York City, 274 Lenox Avenue, Rock Mill Fitness, 3:30 p.m. Peace and love. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.